Here's where we've been. We've been going through this study series, and I think looking around the room, most of us have kind of been in the play, but some of us haven't. So I want to make sure that we're all somewhat on the same playing field as we get into today's study. This study has been called Divergent. It is a study on the Sermon on the Mount, which is a sermon that Jesus gave very early in his ministry as people were coming because of what he could do for them, healing the sick, cast out demons. Again, that's kind of still a problem today where people are just coming to Jesus because of what he can do for them. And Jesus was starting out very early and saying, but this is what it looks like to follow me. This is what it looks like when you have real life change. When you accept Jesus as leader and forgiver in your life, then this is what it looks like. So we have gone through this sermon so far, and we'll call it Divergent. Again, with Chris's help, I'll put that definition up yet again this week, just simply because divergent means to grow in a new direction. And my hope is that our expectancy going into these studies is that we're wanting to grow in a different direction than the rest of the world. We want to go in a different direction than maybe things have been for the last 6 months or last year or the last 5 years or our entire lifetime. We want to go in a new way, and we're looking at what Jesus says his way looks like. We started out looking at what our heart is supposed to be, is with the Beatitudes, blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful, why they're blessed to be peacemakers, and getting our heart in the right place as those who follow Christ, that we adopt his heart instead of what we're naturally born with. From there, we immediately went into how we take that heart to others, because we're not part of some kind of religious system that helps us to feel better about ourselves. There's a lot of faiths that can do that. We're part of the truth, and that God that we worship, that Savior that came and saved us, wants to reach the whole world, and we are the plan to do that. And so this is how you become the salt in the middle of this flavorless world. This is how you become the light in the darkness that this world has to offer. And then last week we started moving into more of the practical day-to-day, how these things play out. And he really looked at it from the standpoint of the a lot of the hypocrisy they were seeing within the church and the church leaders at the time. And also how to fulfill the law in your life instead of just a bunch of do's and don'ts. And he looked at, again, really practical things: anger, lust, whether it be lust sexually or for power or for position or status, looking at keeping your word and being a person of integrity. There's a lot of things that he looked at. And as we continue in and we start moving to the next chapter, that flow of the practical things continues. It's going to be from a little bit of a different standpoint. He's taking a little bit more head-to-head with the Pharisees and Sadducees and saying, don't be like them. Don't be like the religious people at the time, or how many people find the word religion today. But this is what it looks like, and we take it to the next level. So with that, we're going to get back into it. We're going to go to Matthew 6. If you got your Bibles with you, it's a great place to go. Again, we have YouVersion up and running if you need it at all, and then also the Bibles in the room if you would like to use one of those in Matthew 6. So as we lean into this, and again, it really is kind of taking it straight head-to-head into what they have been talking about and what the religious leaders have been exhibiting. And the first verse that we come to is the overall statement. It's kind of like if you remember being back in your English classes, back in school, the paragraph, usually the first sentence is kind of the overview, and then the rest of the sentences break out a lot of the details. This is the way that Jesus teaches often and how he teaches in this particular chapter. So in verse 1, his overall statement is this: beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Now, this one little bitty sentence really breaks into 4 different truths of what he's trying to get through to us, because our natural tendency is not this. As people born into the world, people born in sin, there's a lot of times when we do something good, there's a motive behind it, as far as getting something back or getting some kind of recognition or trying to manipulate a situation. That's the natural sinful tendency within it. So he starts with a warning to you, as a son of God, as a daughter of God, to be careful. Just recognize that that's part of who we are being in this world. To be careful, be cautious, be mindful, put some safety zones around yourself if you have to, put some boundaries in place, get an accountability partner to make sure that when you are doing righteousness, that you're doing it for the right reasons. So he has a warning. He goes, beware of, so kind of listen up, get into, but beware of practicing your righteousness for a particular reason. Now, second thing not to miss here, do you realize he assumes that we're practicing our righteousness? It's not just a beware of doing it, but that he's assuming, as those who are following the Lord, that we're going to be righteous people. It's not if you choose to do the right thing, It's when you do the right thing, when you are being righteous. That's just part of our tendency. And there's several reasons why he assumes that. One, in the original context, as he's talking to the Jewish people here in this particular setting, is they are those who proclaim to follow the law. And the law says, be generous to people. So he's going to be talking about generosity today. And so he kind of assumes that's into place. He also continues to illuminate that as he goes forward in some of his talk and some of the readings that we had, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. So he's assuming that we're practicing our righteousness, but he says don't do it before other people in order to be seen by them. This is really comes down to your heart issue, your motive issue, and why we are doing the things that we do. So be cautious to make sure you don't do it in front of them just for adoration or to, a quick pro quo, because you will get it. If you want adoration, if you want quick pro quo, if you're trying to, you'll get it. And it will last for 15 minutes, just like anybody's 15 minutes of fame, and then it's going to be gone, and you're going to have to do something else to get a quick fix, depending on what your motives are as we talk today. But here he says, don't worry about that. Don't worry about whether or not you're being recognized, but go for the reward that your Father has in heaven. There's something greater, there's something permanent, there's something eternal that is available to you if you choose it, not just by doing the act, but by having the right heart behind doing it. So, in this particular section, he's going to talk to us about how that plays out in our prayer life. He talks about how it plays out in our fasting. He's going to talk about a couple different topics over the next couple of weeks. But as I said, today we're going to focus in on generosity and taking care of people in need. So let's break into verse 2 and see how this plays out in that specific area of our lives. He says, thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So the exact same principle as the overview, but into this particular area of generosity. So let's break that apart and how that plays out. Did you notice there's another assumption here? The first assumption is that you want to be righteous. Second assumption is when you give to the needy. Not if you choose to give to the needy. Not if you want to do this or do that, or if it just happens to be a good day, or if you happen to have an extra dollar in your pocket as you're walking by the guy in the street. But there's an assumption you are going to give. Again, the law calls for us to be people who take care of one another and take care of the helpless, or for those that are in need. Deuteronomy, let me make sure I get this right reference, Deuteronomy 15:11. I don't know if we have that one or not. Do we, Chris? Okay. But it's probably the clearest statement within the law. There's multiple, but the clearest of simply saying there will always be people in need. It is part of this fallen world. It was not part of God's original plan. It is not the way that he originally designed it, but because of the corruption within his creation, there's always going to be people in need. Jesus even made a comment like this in his own ministry. You'll always have people in need. It's just part of what it is, but part of the plan to rectify that is us taking care of one another, of us helping others. Using it for God's purposes and God's way. That was what the original law was. They did not have Social Security. They did not have welfare. They did not have a system where the people looked at the government and said, we don't want to take care of each other. Here, you do it through programs. And to make it even worse is when we get to the point that we're angry that we have to pay taxes to the programs to take care of one another that we don't want to have to be hands-on with. They didn't have those systems. The system was taking care of one another. And so this is why it was so important within the law. But as we talked about last week, with Jesus fulfilling the law, we have to see what things are reinstated, what things are reaffirmed when it comes to those things within the law. So the question becomes, in the New Testament, does it command us to take care of one another? Absolutely it does. If we go back to last week's reading, you're right there in chapter 5, verse 42. It says, give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Jesus has just set something out for them within this area for us to be generous people. And so it's reaffirmed within it. And I love how Jesus does that. It's really his structure of how he teaches a lot of times is how I structure, trying to learn from the best, the sermon series that we do, that they build on top of each other. And the assumption is, one, that you were there and experienced it, and two, when you hear the word, that you're doing the word, so you're ready for the next part of the message. So he's already talked to them about being generous people, so now he's assuming that they are. So Old Testament, New Testament, it's all there. But even beyond that, shouldn't we naturally just be generous people? Because as Christians, quite frankly, we are the benefactors of the greatest generosity of all time. When it comes to the truth that you and I deserve nothing of what we have with God because of our sinfulness, that we deserve death, but that he took the hit on the cross, that he took the hit by coming out victorious over sin and death out of the tomb, that he was the one that moved forward in a way that God can say to us, all you need to do is accept this gift. Acknowledge with your mouth he's the Son of God. Believe in your heart he died and rose again, saying he's God, I'm not, and following him. If we believe there's a greater God, or that there's something above, it should change everything. And if he saves us, it should change things even more. So if I accept that kind of generosity in my life, but I'm not willing to take care of the people that he loves in the areas that he calls me to, then there's a disconnect and there's a problem. So it's very good that Jesus is assuming that we're doing giving and that we're taking care of one another. The question we have, if we want to look for areas that we can grow within, is are we? Or are there areas that we can move in new ways and new directions? And it's been interesting. Maybe we'll get into it, but God's been kind of stretching me this week in some of those areas. So I'm kind of preaching to myself in some of these things. That's how God grows us and continues to move forward. But assuming that you're giving to the needy, just so we can continue on to the next point, the question becomes then is whether or not you're doing it for the right motives. He says, sound no trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues, in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Now, we have zero record of any Pharisee or any Sadducee ever giving any money or doing some kind of help to serve somebody else, and they actually had a bugle and they're playing little horns, so everybody looks and watches and checks out what they're doing. But what we do have is we have record that they would do it in elaborate ways to make sure that they got the credit for it. With we'll just use this as an example. We'll go with with financially. So there's a lot of different ways you can be generous, and I think we're called to all of them as the Spirit leads. But financially, when they would do their offerings in the synagogue, so you talk about them acting in the church and outside the church, they would do it in ways that really called to attention of how much money they gave, because they wanted that adoration from the people of just look how awesome they are. And not realistically, if it's anything like some churches, and again, the church is the body of Christ, but it does have some challenges that God's working on, I believe. And I've been in some churches where leaders would do big, extravagant things, thinking that they're the example, and that if we do it this way or that way, then that would make other people do this and that. So we had kind of to watch those lines. But when the Pharisees and Sadducees did it, they would take their coins, and remember, their coins were their money. It's not like they had ones and fives and tens and 20s and hundreds and all that. Their big money was coins. I think when we think coins, we think nickels and dimes. But they would take big-time money because they had a lot of influence, being religious leaders. They had a lot of resources. They would loft it into the collection so that it was more like jars than it was a plate or a bucket. Loft it in so it would really echo around in there and bash against each other and bounce around and everything. So people were like, wow, look at all that they're giving. Look what they're doing. They did it in a very extravagant way. And he was saying, if you're doing that just to get adoration, you got your reward and you're done. It's done. You've got your temporary reward. We actually have an example of this. If you want to go to it, I'll read it as well. But Mark 12 has an example of this happening and Jesus' response to it. And it's somewhat of a common testimony, so maybe I've heard it before. If not, it says, Jesus, this is Mark 12, starting at verse 41, Jesus sat down opposite of the treasury, so he's in the church looking at the offering, and he watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him, and he said to them, truly I say to you, this poor woman has put in more than all those who contributing into the offering box. For they all contribute out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had to live on. Everything that she had to live on. And if you really kind of just picture that through, that's kind of a wild scene. It would probably be odd to you if we're taking an offering, and I'm walking behind the offering bag looking to see how much you're putting in. It's just kind of like, wait, hold on. Okay. Because we've all experienced those places where the people who give most have the most influence, right? Or that we've seen people that look at resources from that standpoint. In this case, Jesus isn't looking at how much they're putting in. He's looking at their faith and their heart and their generosity. He's looking at their hearts instead of just the action. And when she goes up and she puts in those 2 coins, which equivalent to about a penny in our language and our day, Jesus gets really, really excited. Really, really excited. Now, I don't, this just might be me. You might have coin collectors, and you might know about pennies that have a lot of worth to them, but just your everyday common penny, I don't really crave it that much. I just don't put a lot of value into it. I thought it was kind of funny when I was doing this part of the study. It was along about Thursday, and Wednesday I was in my office, and my wife can tell you I don't like clutter. Everybody working in the kids ministry right now can tell you that as well, that when I clean, it's trash bag cleaning. It's just throwing crap out and just getting rid of it. And so I have to give them warning so that they can save the stuff they want, because I'll just get going. And I was in my office, and there was this penny that's been sitting there for 2 weeks. I have no clue where it came from, but it's been sitting on my desk for 2 weeks, and I was just like, clutter. Threw it in the trash can. I think it's legal, isn't it? You're allowed to do that. It has no worth to me. There's no challenge. And I don't think the government would be too upset, because they have talked many times over the last 10 or 15 years. Was it somebody's penny? Did I throw somebody's penny away? Look, my family's mad at me.
I throw pennies away.
You throw pennies away?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, my daughter and my wife is back from Idaho. But even the government has been talking for a long time about not even making pennies anymore because of the lack of worth. If you go to Canada, there is no such thing as pennies up there anymore. We were actually up in Canada about 4 or 5 months ago, and we were on like this thing where I had like a bus guide, and he was passing time while you're driving down the street, and he was holding up American words and telling us to guess what the Canadian version was, and the Canadian version was on the back, and the last one was pennies. And nobody knew what it was called. He says, because we don't call them pennies, we don't have pennies. We just don't have them. There's no worth to it. It's not going to pay the electric bill. It's not going to pay for a mission trip. It's not going to take and do anything. But her faith and her generosity was something he stopped and he got excited about and said, guys, come here, look at this. Come here and look at this. Now, I think our tendency would either, one, maybe miss it, or two, run up to her and say, no, you got to keep those 2 pennies. That's all you got left. 2 coins is all you got left. You got to keep that. You got to buy some groceries. You got to do something else. But she was coming in faith and saying, I trust him, period. And came with her generosity to the Lord. And Jesus said, you get a reward that's much more than anything those 2 pennies could have possibly bought you. And I guarantee you God took care of her. And I also am pretty encouraged by the fact that we're talking about her testimony 2,000 years later of what it means to him and what it means to us. So he says, make sure that you're not taking and doing things in such a way that you're being like the hypocrites that are lofting in a big offering or lofting in a big act of service that puts them in the spotlight in such a way that they want your adoration. And there's a lot of different ways that we do this in the world, and a lot of different things that I've seen within the world. For instance, I've seen, again, there's people who do these type of things to look good or to have a certain position within a church. I remember I worked with one church, and the pastor was a really good guy, really good heart, but had a need to be the savior of others. Not Jesus be the savior of others. He wouldn't phrase it this way, but he just had a need for people to need him. And a lot of the pastoral care and a lot of the pastoral counseling was all about when everything goes, just call me. I'm going to be there. Let's meet weekly. Let's do this. He just constantly had this need of being needed. And that works for a while. And people depend on you, and people love you, and people think you're awesome, and people think you're great for a while. But it also doesn't last forever, because it's not pointing them to the true answer, which is him. If I'm not pointing you to him, and I'm trying to do it all myself, not only will I burn out, but you've got very limited resources compared to what's above. And in this case, as the need continued and the addiction continued, there was a point where you start blowing some lines and you start having some confidentiality broken as you're trying to show people just how good you are by sharing other people's stories, and end up leading to him losing the church because he had the moment, but it wasn't the reward that Jesus would have had for him. So we have to watch that kind of heart. People catch on sooner or later when we're motive instead of Jesus. Other things that I've seen, sometimes we help others because we have an addiction to just feeling good about doing it. There's something about taking and giving somebody some food when they don't have food, and their face lights up, and you're part of that, and you're excited about that. You give them clothing when they don't have clothing, and you're excited about that. It's a blessing. It's awesome. It's great. But sometimes we stop it there and start taking it into ourselves instead of taking it to God. Sometimes we can try to take and do things to point people to Jesus, and then we end up getting in the way of it by trying to take it on ourselves. I had a person, it was a clothing closet in the community. Again, I'm on a lot of different discussion boards and talking to different folks, and there was a clothing closet ministry, and the person running it was very addicted to that emotion, that feeling, and what she needed, to the point that it started once again to corrupt things over time in her personal life, and started having some neglectful situations at home, started having feelings of being needed in other ways, turned into some physical affairs, turned into losing her marriage, losing the ministry, and losing that platform, because those type of things only last for a little while. That kind of quick fix only lasts for a little while. And so those things end up slipping away and falling away. And so we have to be able to watch those type of things too. By the way, this also happens in the church, not just individuals. The church can struggle with these type of things as well. There's a lot of times, if we're not careful, and again, these are very fine lines, churches can start looking at doing help ministries and generosity ministries to grow the church. It's one thing to grow the kingdom, it's another to try to grow the church. And it's, like I said, it's such a delicate balance that you have to be really careful with it. I had a couple come to me one time. They were struggling with the church because they had a lot of resources. It was a larger church, and they had free breakfast for people that were homeless on Sunday mornings, which is great, right? That's awesome. They had it in this section of the building. At the other section of the building, they had church. But they did it at the same time so that those who were coming to get the food couldn't come to the church service. And so there was really kind of a separation of these two different cultures, because those within church service were successful business people who had a lot of resources and whatnot. So they kind of felt good about it, but there really was kind of a disconnect there. Great intentions, great help in the need, but helping them to Christ is something that might be looked at differently. I was in a meeting one time with a lot of different pastors talking about helping people in need within the community and how we do that. Most of the pastors within the church were churches of maybe 40 or less people. A lot of them are in the downtown area, have very limited resources, but they feel a commitment to helping those in need. And in this particular meeting, we also had a pastor who was from a larger church that has resources and staff, and they were sharing that they were really trying to find a way for someone else to take care of the people in the need, because they didn't have the staff to really take and deal with all these people that had needs. And so it was really struggling. And all the people are just like, I wish I had a staff. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like this weird disconnect. And then, again, I love this person, but sometimes we can get off track, and the statement was made, why would I want to help people by paying their electric bill and buying the food if they're not even going to start coming to our church? I mean, why would we do this if they're not coming to our church to support us? That's not our motive. That's not our generosity. There's very thin lines between our motive on the generosity that we do, that we have to be very, very cautious of, because it can lead us into some pretty messed up places and lead us into false religion, quite frankly. Again, a lot of the reason why a lot of people are just sick and burn out on church is because of false religion, because of selfish motives, because of hypocrisy, because of programs, because of stage presence, those type of things. That's not what Christ has called us to. It's the reason why we hear that statement. I'm all about your Christ. I'm just can't stand his followers. I just can't. I don't want to be part of church. I can be a Christian, not be a church. There's just no purpose to it. There's no relationship to it. It's because we get into this false religion because our motives get off. And Jesus says we've got to be really cautious of that. We got to be really cautious of that. Because according to Christ, and I know I use this verse often, but I really want to make sure we get this. We'll put up on the screen for you. It's James 1. According to the teachings of the New Testament, the religion that God approves of is taking care of others, the orphans, the widows, and then keeping ourselves polluted from not having that kind of attitude or that kind of mentality that the world has. That is what true religion is. If we're not being generous, are we anywhere near that verse? and if we're being generous for selfish motives, then we definitely aren't. These are the type of things that Jesus is trying to get to us. So, if that's how we don't do it, how do we practice religion and our generosity correctly? I think the first thing is what's going to kind of stand out is it's talking about taking and doing your giving in secret. And so I've had people ask me about, when it comes to this verse, does that mean like if I decide I'm going to give a little kid some candy and someone catches it, that my moment's gone and God's not going to like notice that, and that's not a good thing? Like, do I have to like literally take the kid off to the side and kind of hide them off that piece of candy? First off, don't take little kids off to the side. It's creepy. But you know what I mean? It's like where you're trying to be like secretive about everything that you're doing because I want to do it because God put on my heart to do it. But then what if somebody sees or what somebody hears? I don't think that's the right way. And I struggle with that myself. I remember just like you, from a church perspective, there was a time, going back a while, that there was a family in our church, and they've been in our church for a few years, and one day the husband came and talked to me to let me know that they decided that they were going to move on to another church, which, by the way, is awesome. I was just talking with somebody the other day about how they struggle, have had struggles here because of some people leaving and why they left and was supposed to be family, supposed to be community. They're not really even part of the situation, but they see it and it confuses them and it causes hurt and pain. I get that. It's really awesome when we communicate. God does call people different places, different times. Sometimes it's a matter of communication. But in this particular case, I really respect that he came and we were sitting and talking. And he said the main thing was they're just really mission-oriented. They're just really passionate about missions, overseas missions. And he said, we just don't do anything like that here. And we need to be someplace that's supporting missions. I said, okay. That's where God's calling you to go. That's awesome. That's great. But can I share with you some things? And I shared with him 5 different things that we were doing mission-wise overseas, who we were supporting, things that were setting up, things that were going on, communications going back and forth. And you could just see on his face, it wasn't like a surprise. It wasn't like, oh, that's cool. It was what the heck? And he got there. He's like, well, I've never heard any of this. Well, of course you haven't, because we're godly and we were doing it in secret. What are we supposed to do? Get up on the stage and say, look how great we are? Right? Because we don't want to be that guy. We don't want to be that church. But at the same standpoint, I kind of got it that we're also not glorifying what God's doing with what he trusts us with and what he's doing within it. So if you give me some way to move with this, and again, this is Tom commentary. When it comes to Scripture, you're stuck with it. When it comes to Tom stuff, just pray about it and dismiss what you think is wrong. But I'm really taken by this phrase of don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And I think, like in the physical realm, that's literally impossible to do. It's not like I'll just keep you over here, right? But I think for me, it's stop focusing on your own hands and focus on the hands of God. That's the way I take it. That if I'm so worried about what I'm doing here, then I'm really coming from a control standpoint. I'm coming from a standpoint of what I want to do, what I'm comfortable with doing, what I'm doing, what kind of response am I getting from it. Are people acknowledging me enough? Am I mad because Tom went on Facebook and said thank you to Michael for working on the computer at the church, but he didn't go on there and say thank you to me for coming in and sweeping the church? Those are the type of things that it takes us to that are very natural. But beware of practicing your righteousness for the wrong reasons. I really think it's all about what God is doing. And we really have become very purposeful in the last 4 years. If you see anything being celebrated, whether it be the reverse trick-or-treat the other night and the kids going out there, we're celebrating what the volunteers are doing and we're celebrating what God did through it. Not, hey, this is a great idea that we had in some board meeting someplace and put it into place and look what we did. It's very purposeful to make sure that it's on the focus of the serving and of God's response. Miss Audrey with the grandkids going out yesterday to Trail of Tears. There was a lot of rain. No other volunteers showed up. She was on it. And she took candy, and while there wasn't 1,000 people, there's 300 because of the rain, they were on it. Out there taking a minister with people, laughing with people, smiling with people, getting drenched with people. I celebrate her, I celebrate the kids, and I celebrate what God did through that moment. That's what we try to focus on, because what we're focusing on is look at what God is doing when we say yes. Prayerfully, we're saying yes. Prayerfully, we're saying yes. So what is this reward that he's talking about? And this reward is going to come up over and over and over again. When we practice generosity in such a way that it's righteousness and it's for the right reasons and we're taking care of others who are in need, there is a reward. And I think a lot of times when we think about a reward from God, then we automatically think about heaven. Like that's the thing a lot of people are kind of shooting for. They accept Jesus as leader, forgiving their lives. They believe there's a bigger person, a bigger God out there. They don't really let it change their lives that much. They don't lean into the purpose of what they've been called to. They don't lean into Christian community, but they believe there's a God. And because I said a prayer once at VBS, I get to heaven someday. And that's kind of the reward that we kind of put on the plane that's there. And I'll tell you what, heaven's a pretty good retirement plan. I'm not bashing that up at all. But if we spend our entire life on this earth thinking the only reward we're going to get from having an intimate relationship with Jesus Christ is someday I get to be in glory with my mom, and for you guys, for the other people, and with the Lord, then we're really missing the huge part of what is today, as we're talking about the kingdom of heaven today in righteousness. So my reward of being generous to others with the right heart and giving God the glory for it includes things like his provision in my life has an open flow without me blocking it. The lady who gave the 2 coins, she knew God had her. I want to be able to have that too. I know God has promises of provision over my life. I'd like to act like I believe it. And I'd like to make sure I don't get in his way and remove that obstacle. The reward that I have is not just his provision, but that I get to grow to be more like Jesus. Chris, do we have the discipleship model? Let's slap that up. Again, when we look at the 5 core things that as a church community that we're encouraging each other within to be able to grow to be more like Jesus, one of those is right over here with the serving the kingdom. With the serving the kingdom standpoint, it's basically defined in my head as ministry. And when I say ministry, it's not that you're plugged into some program within the church, but that you're living the purpose that God has called you to be. And that through the church you can do more because we're supported and we're connected with each other. This is part of our discipleship. I'm growing to be more like Jesus by being generous because I love and because I want to share truth instead of I want the glory. If Jesus just wanted followers, if Jesus wanted people to just hit like on his Facebook post and show up every time he has to talk about, look, I've got 5,000 people in front of me, I must be the bomb, he would not be giving them this message within the first couple of months of his ministry. As what we see time and time again, if you do it right, there's times that people get drawn to you, and there's times that thousands will walk away in a moment. Jesus had 5,000 people plus walk away from him in one moment on one day because he proclaimed the truth. So it's not about anything except for giving God the glory and making sure that the gospel message is going out in very practical ways by seeing Jesus Christ. We get to be part of that. That's one of the rewards, is growing to be more like Christ. We also have, thank you, Chris, we also have that we grow in our focus on God. If I'm truly trusting God with my finances, I don't know about you, maybe you're rich, I'm not rich. I'm more comfortable than I have been in other times in my life. I bring good stewardship to it, but my money stresses me out. And if I'm actually growing in my understanding that God is my provision and that I am to be loose-handed as he leads, not just crazy, just go throw it out in the street just because you feel good about yourself, but as he leads, then there's a growing to take and have my focus on God for his answer instead of me trying to control it myself all the time. Generosity, again, is not just money. If I'm doing it with my time, my focus is on God. What do you want me doing with my time instead of me trying to control my schedule all the time and being overwhelmed and being stressed? That's a reward that I have within him that's very practical and today. And the last one that came to my mind when I was writing down these little notes is one we've been talking about a lot. I get to be part of other people's testimonies. It's one thing for someone to think I'm a good person for 15 minutes and then they go on to whatever their next need is. It's another for the rest of your life, get to be part of a testimony of how God used you to do something great and meet a need in somebody's life. For someone to say to people, man, you don't know how good God is. I had fallen apart. I had lost my job. I didn't know how I was going to pay for my car. We didn't have any food. I was embarrassed by the whole thing. I was trying to hide it. And I was trying to correct the whole thing. And finally, I took and spoke to Barb. And she's a good friend, and we were talking about it. And Barb went to her checkbook, and she went out and she bought me groceries because she said she loves Jesus, and Jesus would do it for her, so she's going to do it too. She connected me with her church, and they had solutions in some different areas and some gift cards. And then God did this. And the next thing you know, I got this job. And the next thing I got this. And all of a sudden, there's this foundation. Look what God did. You get to be part of that testimony. That's for everything. That's not 15-minute, hey, thank you so much. when we're trying to do it of our own. That's a reward that we have that's available to you. No matter how much money you have, no matter how much time you have. It's a matter of making sure you're doing those resources properly. Don't wait until you got money to be generous. You'll never get to that bar. You'll win the lottery and you still won't get to that bar. You'll come up with all kinds of needs for that $236 million that guy won the other day. You imagine getting $236 million? I don't know. Anyways, that's the truth. But a heart change is something that we can do today. So let's talk about some opportunities. If we'll get into some response time here, we'll talk about how some of these things kind of play out. Stop and think about this. Matter of fact, let's pray over this. Dear Heavenly Father, I pray that you give us the next few minutes to hear your Spirit, because we're talking about some very broad things, across the board things of how we respond to your generosity, of the life that you purposed us for, created us for, and restored us to through your Son as we lean into you. So I pray that you now just take these next few moments and let your Spirit speak into our hearts and our minds in very practical ways of how we can take this message, this study, what you are saying in your word, and shape things in a way that we're going to be more like you. Just minister to us and give us discernment in this time. In your name we pray, amen. First thing is, look at the generous things you're already doing, and then check your motive. That's the easiest one to go with, right off the bat. Check the things that you're doing right now. Good, that's awesome. There's a lot of great people with great hearts in this room, or watching this podcast, whatever the case may be. Are your motives right? Or are you borderline some of these Pharisee-type things? Again, we demonize the Pharisees and Sadducees. They're just, they shouldn't be that far from us because they're understandable to our sinfulness. Or are we doing it Christ's heart? Look at those things, and what kind of things can we take and celebrate other people and the volunteering they're doing? What can we do to point the focus to God and what He's doing through it? We're simply screwdrivers and hammers in His toolbox. That's really all it comes down to, and being willing to be used. From there, let's talk about some things in your personal life. How can you be financially generous with your finances? And how can you be personally generous when it comes to your time? And I always bring those two to the forefront because I really do believe those are the two biggest idols that not just the world has, but people within the church have. It's our money and our time. They just overrun us in a heartbeat. And Jesus talks about both of them so very much. How can you be a little looser in your hands with these two items? Are there people around you that have needs? Are there situations that you see that have needs? Are you so focused on your own needs that you don't see the needs of other people around you? These are some of the things that we need to bring into our checkbook and into our schedule book and see what kind of differences that we can have. And you can do it in really creative ways. It can be kind of fun. Again, I'm not the best financial place. I'm not the worst financial place, so that means I have a discussion in certain areas. And I'll share a story. There's been times like I've got a particular buddy comes to mind who is very skilled, very talented, is a work dog. I mean, just on it. If he starts a project, he's just going to rip it apart. And he's also kind of down on his luck, as we would put it, in some ways. So do I hand him $50 or $100 or $200? Or do I say, hey, I've got some opportunities at the house, there's some things that can be done. And then he can come over and do some things, and then dignity, because he doesn't want a handout, he takes and provides for his family by putting some work in while he's not able to work in other places. You can be creative on some of these things. And you can also serve them within it. That was one of the things that God was working on my heart this week. You take one step, and then you start trying to excuse off number 2, 3, and 4. So there's definitely ways we can grow there. But those aren't the only things we can be generous with. We can be generous with our love. There's a lot of people around you that just need love. And we can be generous with the gospel. There's a lot of people who need to hear and see the gospel in their lives. You can be generous with your forgiveness to those who have hurt you, to those who, that maybe there's a perception difference that the two of you have. There's a lot of different opportunities you have. What would you capture right now as the Holy Spirit speaks? That might be the next step in your generosity. Supporting somebody, showing up for your kids, showing up for your spouse, This is generosity. So what we're called to. It shouldn't be things that we have to do because we're trying to do good things. It should be things that we just do because we love Jesus and we love them. In church, tithes and offerings are obviously a generosity issue. Making sure that I have God first and his mission first, that I have generosity built into my finances, into my offerings, as well as my stewardship of taking care of the needs that I've committed to, that I have, and not trying to control things, but being with the 2 coins. Within the church, there's also ways beyond the tithe. The Stephen Fund collection is the way that a lot of people show their generosity. We're about to take a collection for that with our communion, and that fund is 100% for helping people in need. It is a very active fund, and God has been good through it. Missions, if you're like the gentleman that I talked about a few minutes ago, you, over your time, designate to missions, Bible Church of Thailand, or to Jenny over in Thailand, or to some of the other outreaches we do, or like adopting the kids in Jamaica that we did. And then I will give you a few that are coming up that are things to plug into if you're looking for ways to kind of take first steps. And we'll put some of these up on the screen that we have with you. But we've already kind of announced the Thanksgiving meal, and we do this every year. This is our 3rd year that we do it with our IMA. And it gives a lot of opportunities to being generous to people that are in need. There's down at the old rec center, right behind the police station. And again, we work with our other IMA churches on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And all the churches, I need a couple people to do hams, and I need people to do green beans. Just put it in your mind. We're going to be putting that out here real soon. If you want to be a part of that, we would love it. We have always had really good support from people within our church showing up to set up, to serve, to have relationships with, to show Jesus, to love on them, and to tear down. And I'm really excited about that opportunity. So that's coming up. That's something that you'll be hearing about a little bit more in the next couple of weeks. We're real excited. I know I put it on Facebook, but some people touch base with us. There's also stuff for IMA, and somebody sent me an email like, hey, you want 8 large turkeys? Yeah, I do. Oh, 8 large turkeys. I think 8 cartons of water that came in. By the way, thank you to the Russells who have 8 large ice up turkeys in their freezer right now. Within that, there's a lot of opportunities within that we have. And then this Christmas, we're actually going to, for the December season, we're going to be focused on 2 main things, and this is all I really have right now. It's generosity and our TSF kids. And so we've got some things coming up even Christmas-wise, and part of that, we're going to bring back the Generosity Challenge for those who've been around for a few years. Generosity Challenge, I'm not going to explain yet. We'll do it when we get closer. Those who have been around know, but you might want to do this. Generosity Challenge asks you to take $20 and put it aside. Per person in your house, $10 per kid, and put it aside. If you can't afford, and don't tell me you can't afford it and then go to Applebee's in the movies. Okay? You can't afford $20 to $10, that's fine. Pick something that's a little bit of a sacrifice. No matter what the amount is. If $20 is nothing, and you're just like, I lose that in the wash every week, get 50 out. Make it something that's sacrificial. Put it aside. It will not come to me. It will not come to the church. Those are the only things I can tell you. And you don't get it. But you got to be part of the Generosity Challenge. Something to think about and get that ready for as we get ready into December. We're also bringing back another one that we did a few years ago with Emily's Christmas stockings. This is something that my daughter did a few years back that the church supported for the homeless shelters. And we'll be doing that again. So we'll have some collection of candy and filling stockings and going out to the homeless shelters and being generous to those in need. And it was really kind of a cool thing because I kind of put this on my list like, it'd be kind of cool to do this again. And then I didn't say anything. It was about 5 days later, Emily came back and said, hey, I've been thinking about this again. I kind of have a couple ideas. I'm like, okay, we're doing it because that's God's confirmation. And then the other thing that we'll be having as well is we're going to be having a Christmas offering as part of our Christmas. And you want to watch our Christmas schedule because we're doing it different this year. We do not have a Christmas Eve gathering this year. We have an evening one. Well, you'll be okay. We do have an evening service. But I think it ends up being Christmas Eve, I think. So we're just throwing you off just a little bit. But we'll be having a Christmas offering that is going to be 100% about generosity, and I do not know all the details yet. We're putting that through and going into that. So there's some opportunities coming up there as well. But what is yours? And what is your next one? That is the question. Because us being generous to other people, quite frankly, is another way that we're having communion with Christ. It's one of the ways that we dance with Him. It's one of the ways we walk with Him. It's one of the ways that we walk with Him that helps us get out of our own little bubble and our own little needs and our own little wants. And it's so important. And I'll tell you what, the awesome part is that God rewards you the ways that we're talking about rewarding you. You're still going to get the really cool, short, temporary ones too. It's just going to be legitimate on a foundation instead of something we're trying to manipulate for our own reasons.